Hello everybody. I want to start talking about the new SBS sections, or at least the most important parts of the new SBS sections that came out with Volume 101. According to Oda, if Killer had gotten a smiley power, he would have gotten an elephant power, and his head would be stuck to the elephant's trunk. It's a very disturbing image for those of you who've seen it. So just imagine this deformity of an elephant trying to fight Big Mom and Kaido on the rooftop. We also find out that Yamato's club, or Kanabo, is named Takeru, and so that seems to confirm something that we've already been speculating about, which is that a lot of aspects of Yamato's character seem to be a reference or an echo to the legendary Japanese figure of Yamato Takeru. We also got more information on Shanks' crew, specifically the names of some of the members of Shanks' crew. Shout out to Lime Juice and Monster the Monkey. And I do want to talk about Shanks' crew more in depth a little bit later, because I do think that Oda revealing this information could have very big implications for the future of the story. I'll talk about this by the end, because I want to make a point about this. And then the other pretty significant bit of information that we get from the SBS is that Shimotsuki Ushimaru is actually not Zoro's father. Now, that doesn't mean that Zoro is not a Shimotsuki, it just means that Ushimaru is not his dad. Now, if we take some time to think about this, I think we'll all come to the conclusion that there's something serious going on with the Shimotsuki genes. Because now we have three characters in the story that are Shimotsuki that have other characters within the same story that look identical to them. So Shimotsuki Ushimaru looks like Zoro, okay? That's one pair. Then we have Kuina. Kuina was a Shimotsuki as well, and Tashigi looks identical to her. And then the last pair is obviously Koshiro, who's also a Shimotsuki, and Denjiro. So it's obvious now that the Shimotsuki clan has very powerful genes that they can pass on. I'm pretty sure that Oda will give us a Shimotsuki family tree in the future, and all of this will become clear. But in the meantime, I do think that this confirms that Kuina and Tashigi cannot be the same person.
I was going to suggest that maybe Kuina and Tashigi are long-lost twins that were separated at birth, but then I checked the One Piece wiki, the timeline, and it turns out that that can't be true either, because Tashigi was born 23 years ago, and Kuina was born 22 years ago. Also, Kuina's dad, Koshiro, was born 51 years ago, and it turns out that Denjiro was born 47 years ago. So they can't be twins either. So this is kind of like Oda telling us, see, I'm telling you, the Shimotsuki genes are very strong. So for the readers that still believe that Kuina and Tashigi are the same person, I feel like Oda can use this as a justification. He can point to this and say, this is why they are not the same person. Also, according to the SBS, in the darkest timeline, in an alternate timeline, Frankie actually goes ahead and turns his entire body into a battleship at the age of 70.
Cover shows Usopp winning a year's supply of juice for some kid minks that honestly look like they could be down at the fire festival this very moment. And he's wearing a mask that reminded me of the blacksmiths from Demon Slayer. Turns out that the inspiration behind those masks is actually a Japanese character known as Hyotoko. Now typically Hyotoko is a comic relief character in Japanese folklore, but one myth about him is that he was actually a boy with a strange face that could create gold out of his belly button. And then in other parts of Japan, he's also seen as a god of fire. And so that connects to the Demon Slayer blacksmiths a little bit more, because in order to craft swords, you need both fire and steel. Now, if we look at the chapter's title, I want to point out that we've gotten two other chapters that are similarly named. Chapter 1018 was called Jinbei vs. Who's Who, and this fight in particular started escalating a chapter before this one, in chapter 1017. But 1018 is technically the end of Jinbei vs. Who's Who. And then if we go to chapter 1020, we got a chapter named Robin vs. Black Maria. And this fight actually ended a chapter after this one, in 1021, with a chapter called Demonio. So if Oda's following the same pattern here with Sanji, then it would follow that Sanji versus Queen has approximately one chapter left. And then also, just the fact that Queen shows us a lot of stuff that he's been hiding in this chapter, technique-wise, it just kind of gets me to think about Zoro and King, because Zoro's fights typically end after Sanji's fights. So I'm wondering, if this is how much Queen was hiding in terms of attacks, I'm wondering, can you imagine how much King and Kaido are hiding? It goes back to the SBS where Oda drew how King eats, and so it turns out that just like Katakuri, King has a huge problem with other people getting to see his actual face. So it just gets me to think, like, what is King hiding? Okay, so Momonosuke figures out that he technically doesn't have to make fire clouds that are bigger than Kaido's fire clouds. All he has to do is grab onto the already created fire clouds that Kaido made and start pulling on them. And so that way he can begin moving the island in the opposite direction, so even if the island falls, it won't fall on top of the flower capital. We get a brief shot inside of the performance floor, and there's a beast pirate guy wearing a jacket that says Dasiru, which according to Google Translate means dash or dash into, which kind of fits the scene because that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to force his way out. In that same panel, we get to see Panda Man in the background there, doing a peace sign. We go to Sanji versus Queen to see Queen's eyes glowing, and he uses an attack on Sanji called Sparking Queen, which is a reference to Ichiji's Sparking Valkyrie attack. Now, I want to invite everybody to think about these attacks from Sanji's perspective. Because from Sanji's perspective, this is a very emotionally charged sequence of attacks. Because not only are these attacks a reference to his brothers, which would bring up the abuse that he experienced as a child, but also these are the strongest attacks from his brothers. And so what we get here is that unlike when Sanji was a child, when he was defenseless against these attacks, now he's able to deal with them in a much more proactive way. The Valkyrie doesn't even touch him, right? He's able to dodge that one easily. He gets hit with the Henry Blazer, but gets up immediately after that, so he just ate that one up. And then he's actually able to completely shatter the winch Danton. Just breaks Queen's arm off. And so not only does this prove that Sanji is a better person than his brothers because he's kind, but also, despite the abuse that he experienced as a child, this fight also proves that Sanji is a much better fighter than all of his brothers as well. Because again, he's showing us that he can deal with his brothers' strongest attacks. And not only are those their strongest attacks, but they're also the attacks that each of the Vinsmoke siblings used to help Sanji escape Whole Cake Island. So it wasn't all doom and gloom, it's not all black and white. There was some good that came out of those attacks, because they were used to help Sanji. Like by the end of the arc, they were all like, "Go, Sanji!" I did kind of miss Reiju in this chapter though. I would have wanted Queen to use like a pink hornet sort of poison attack on Sanji as well. But I guess it's because she was born before the boys, so she's not from the same batch of kids. But then also, Reiju was the only one of Sanji's siblings who didn't really actively abuse him. So maybe that's why. Sanji goes on to use Flanche Strike on Queen, which is a kick that he used against Virgo, but then Queen reveals that he's also capable of using Stealth Black to disappear. And then Sanji matches that invisibility by starting to move so fast that he's undetectable. So essentially Sanji starts pulling a Rock Lee versus Gaara. This initially surprises Queen, but upon further reflection he thinks, well, he's going to tire himself up eventually. And then all of a sudden we see a little mouse there running down the hallway, which also happens to be a reference to Sanji's past. Because as we know, as a child, Sanji used to cook for a little mouse. But then Judge found out, and he threw that little mouse out of a window. So the name of this new mouse is Chuji, and he is the pet of Osome, the girl that we were misled into believing that Sanji had beaten up. I'm not sure what the consensus was at the time, but if you watch my review, I repeatedly said that there was no way that Sanji had actually beaten her up. Zoro would have been turning in her grave if that had happened. Turns out it was Queen who messed up Osome by using his invisibility. I liked learning that him having a crush on Komurasaki was actually a plot point that had some degree of payoff. It's why I wanted him to fight Sanji from the very beginning. Now, Queen makes a comment. In the official translation, he says, "With Komurasaki gone, you're my #1 girl, Osome." So that kind of makes it sound as if Queen were actively purchasing Komurasaki's services in the past. Then again, maybe he just means that he had a crush on her. And just the fact that Queen can turn invisible, right? And the fact that he's constantly trying to one-up Judge and Vegapunk. At one point he did say, I'm going to show you a cyborg that not even Vegapunk can create. To me, all of that is further evidence that the SSG, the Special Science Group that Vegapunk created, is actually an army of artificial Logia users, Paramecia users, Zoan users, and mythical-type Zoan users. Because if Queen can find a way of turning himself invisible, similar to the Sukesuke no Mi power, I see absolutely no reason for why Vegapunk, who is a superior scientist to Queen, and who also specializes in devil fruits, wouldn't be able to find a way to mass-produce rare artificial devil fruit powers for the Marines. I was actually kind of left wondering how it was that Sanji was able to detect Queen, even though Queen was invisible, because as Queen is approaching Osome, you get the sound effect of the floorboards creaking. So I don't know if Sanji heard the floorboards creaking, and that's how he was able to know where Queen was, or if he just straight up used observation Haki to detect him. Regardless of that, Sanji goes on to show us the newly improved, more powerful version of Ifrit Jambe. And so based off of Sanji's internal monologue, I kind of get the impression that he's doing something similar to what Luffy does with Red Hawk, because what Luffy does for that is that he combines the steam or the heat of his Gear Second and combines it with armament Haki. So Sanji appears to be saying that he's doing something similar, but in his case, I think that Sanji's leg has to be hotter than Luffy's Red Hawk, for the simple reason that we actually see some electricity coming out of his leg. We see some lightning, emanating from it. And so we know that lightning is hotter than fire.
And so Sanji says that the reason for why he can withstand the increased heat of the electricity that he produces is because of a combination of his exoskeleton coupled with his Haki. So in the official translation, Sanji says, "Add the color of armament Haki I've developed to the exoskeleton and my legs are tougher, capable of supporting even hotter flames." So the word developed is interesting in that sentence because it gets me to think like developed when? Developed during the time skip? Because we already know that Sanji has basic armament Haki, right? He has basic hardening. So I don't know if this means that maybe he has Rio now. I checked the Spanish translation. The Spanish translation says, "the armament Haki that I've been polishing." So it's interesting because Rio, the concept of flow, which is a level above basic armament Haki, kind of adds like an extra layer of protection. It adds like a force field sort of effect on top of the basic armament Haki. So if Sanji has that extra layer of protection, it would be very useful to protect against the heat. But I guess we'll just have to leave it up to the anime and see how they show it, like what kind of effect they use on Sanji's leg when they adapt this chapter. So Sanji activates Ifrit Jambe, which just like Diablo Jambe, or Diablo Jambe, Diablo Jambe means devil's foot or devil leg, right? So just like that, Ifrit is also sort of a demon. It's also referencing a devil. But this one is a devil in Arabic culture. From what I read, Ifrits are kind of like these mischievous spirits that can end up being either good or bad. Now, what's cool about Sanji landing the collier hit on Queen, which is a strike to the neck, is that if you notice, this is one of those rare occasions where both of Sanji's feet are lit. What follows is a sequence of connecting kicks, weaker versions of which we've seen Sanji use before, and obviously because it's Sanji, they're named in French, and they're all references to different sections on a cow. So I thought this image was incredibly helpful in identifying the different cuts of meat. So he starts off with the shoulders and then works his way down to the abdomen, the stomach region of the cow, and then the bottom panel, that's, those are kind of like the low blows. Now what's interesting about that bottom panel is that the first attack is Q Crippler, something like that. I think the word Q means tail, so he's attacking the tail. But then there's one attack that is named Poire, P-O-I-R-E, poker. Poire, from what I read, means pear in French. So I'm like, which part of Queen is the pear? Like, does it mean like pear or just like a pear-shaped body part? Because either way, I think it's pointing to the same thing. Anyway, Sanji finishes off the sequence with Boof Burst, which means beef burst. And so what's cool about that final attack there is that it also has a reference to his brothers because it has Ichiji's explosion, right? Queen is sent flying because of the explosion. It has Niji's electricity and Sanji's fire. So it's a combination of all those three. So that was a chapter. Pretty fast-paced chapter. Very quick read because there's a lot of action. But it also has a lot of emotional depth for Sanji's character. Which, like this chapter, like this type of chapter, and I think it was like 1031, those chapters are the ones that I was expecting to get back in Whole Cake Island. This adds a lot of closure, a lot of resolution to Sanji's character arc. And so now, and I said this before, but now I think about Sanji's character arc as starting in Whole Cake Island and then culminating, or at least, reaching its peak in Wano, which again is very similar to the way that Oda handled Robin's character arc and Usopp's character arc, because their arcs begin in Water 7 and they culminate in Enies Lobby or in post-Enies Lobby.
Okay, so according to what Oda revealed in the SBS, the characters in this shot that arrived in Marineford with Shanks are all executives/officers. Or at least that's the term that Library of O'Hara decided to use. However, I did read Redon's translation in Spanish of the SBS, and he actually uses the word commanders to refer to the characters. So with that word commanders in mind, it could be that Shanks' crew is actually modeled after Whitebeard's crew, where Whitebeard actually had his division commanders. And so out of the division commanders, Oda singles out the top brass, which in Whitebeard's case, it would be Marco being the first division commander, Odin and Ace being the second division commanders when they were alive, and then Jozu being the third division commander. And so in the SBS, Oda also separates the top brass of the red-haired pirates for us as well. So Shanks is the captain, and then under him comes Ben Beckman. After Ben Beckman comes Lucky Roo, and then after Lucky Roo is Yasopp. And so it's pretty obvious that these guys are the top three. Now Oda says that Rockstar actually doesn't have an official title, so he's not part of the official commander group or the official executive group, whatever you want to call them. So I think Rockstar would qualify as the messenger/errand boy of the red-haired pirates. Anyway, there's a brief shot in Marineford where the anime kind of like pairs up the red-haired pirates with their Blackbeard pirate counterpart, just to give us a tease to see who would fight who if things were to go down. So obviously Shanks would fight Teach, Ben Beckman would fight Shiryu, Lucky Roo would fight Vasco Shot for whatever reason. So does that mean that Vasco Shot is Sanji's opponent then? We don't know too much about Vasco Shot, aside from the fact that he's always drunk. And then obviously Yasopp would fight Van Ogre.
And so this brings up a question, which is that since Yasopp, Usopp's dad, is the third YC in Shanks' crew, does that mean that Usopp will become the third YC in Luffy's crew, in the Straw Hats? Personally, I don't think so. I don't think that that's what Oda wants to do with Usopp. I think that it's been very obvious that Oda just wants Usopp to remain like the most human character of the crew. Because Usopp is supposed to be like the representation of what a normal human being would be if a normal human being were to join the Straw Hats. He's kind of like the Hawkeye of the group. Granted, you could argue that normal human beings can't see through walls, and Usopp can, so that's a fair point. So I do think that he's going to get stronger, just not third YC level by next arc, which is where I see him meeting his dad. Because Oda's really good at setting things up. So if that were the case, I think that if he wanted Usopp to be third YC soon, he probably would have written that Usopp takes down page 1 by himself or something. And he didn't do that. Now that being said, there has to be something that happens that makes Usopp look really good. And Oda usually handles Usopp he handles the Usopp moments in a very non-conventional way. So maybe he gets a special hammer in Elbaf, and then maybe Oda sets it up where there's this impossible shot in Elbaf that nobody can make, not even Yasopp can make. And so there's a lot of tension, a lot of conflict between Usopp and Van Ogre to see who can make that impossible shot. And by the end, Usopp pulls through and makes the impossible shot that not even his dad could make. So Oda wouldn't make Usopp incredibly strong by next arc, right? But he would still find a way of making him shine, which is kind of the way that Oda has been handling Usopp's character all this time. Now, going back to what I said in the beginning of the video, I'm going to try to make a point about what it means that Oda revealed more information about Shanks' crew in an SBS. So yeah, I just want us to sort of like think about what that means.
So over the week, I found out about the yearly number of sales by series that is published by Oricon, where it turned out that One Piece came in 6th place. And look, like when you're married to a series, like if your wife were to come in 6th place at the city marathon, does that mean that you love her less? No, because even though she came in 6th place, she still has great legs. I mean, there's people trying to justify the numbers, saying that One Piece didn't release as many volumes this year or last year as it usually does. And then I also read that the digital copies of the volumes, they don't get counted into these totals. So I get that, you know? I understand where people are coming from. But at the same time, I literally read a comment that said, somebody was saying like, oh, remember guys, the Japanese people live in very small houses, so they probably don't have enough room to buy all of these volumes of One Piece. I read that comment and I was like, oh boy, oh no. That's some top tier level coping mechanism right there, dog.
Now, despite what was actually said in the comment sort of being a reach, right, kind of being out there as an argument for the sales, I do think that if we dig deep, there is some truth at the core of that comment, which is that One Piece is a very long series. So if we take a look at the series that outsold One Piece, we'll find that all of them are pretty compact. And by that I mean that they're easy to digest because of their length. And even the series that outsold One Piece that are still ongoing, like My Hero Academia and Jujutsu Kaisen, from what I read, the authors have no plans to make their series as long as One Piece. Not even close. And so this is where the length of One Piece can be both a positive and a negative, right? Like, it's a positive because you have tremendous amounts of intricate lore that you can't get anywhere else. But at the same time, it does detract some people from getting into the series. Now, it's not a problem for you and me because we love this series, right? But I do think that if you look at what's going on with Shonen Jump overall, with Shonen, right, I do think that they're betting on the more compact model for stories. At the same time, though, the fact that One Piece has been going on for as long as it has, and it still pulls in those numbers, that is an absolute feat. And that is an accomplishment that we have to acknowledge. One Piece is still the best-selling manga series in history, so it's still doing tremendously well. And I do want to take this moment to congratulate Mr. Akutami, or Gigi Akutami, the author of Jujutsu Kaisen, because I know that it has not been an easy path to the top. I know I read that Jujutsu Kaisen was on hiatus this year because he was having health issues. I read like a blog post a long time ago about how, like, you know, he was having back problems and his chiropractor moved away at some point, so that was a struggle for him. And then I also read, and this kind of infuriated me if I'm being honest, I read that because of his working schedule, when he has time off, when he is, you know, when he's not working, all of the places in Japan where he can go to eat are closed. And so he was having a difficult time finding a place to eat. So it was really shocking and upsetting for me to find out that a best-selling manga author was having a difficult time finding a place where he could have a meal. So I know for a fact that it hasn't been an easy path for Mr. Akutami, the author of Jujutsu Kaisen. And I also read a little bit about the author of Demon Slayer, and I also read that, you know, they also had it rough. So it was not an easy way to the top for either of them. And we know that Oda pays attention to the numbers because in a previous Jump Festa statement, he did sort of congratulate Demon Slayer for its success. So if we look at one of the things that Jujutsu Kaisen and Demon Slayer have in common is that they both have a great anime adaptation. The animation quality for both of those series is magnificent. And so a good anime, I think, you know, has the natural effect of hooking in more people that go to the manga if they want to read up on what happens after they watch the anime. And so I do think that the powers involved with One Piece as a series did take note of that. Because if you notice, if you compare the quality of animation as a whole, if you compare the quality of animation that we've gotten in Wano to other previous arcs of the post-time skip, I mean, the difference is significant. Like, Wano has looked really good in comparison to other arcs. So the anime has really made a substantial effort in upping its game. And the timing of it tends to coincide with Demon Slayer blowing up. And so it's an absolute fact that the quality of the One Piece anime has changed to meet the demands of the time. Now, what else do Jujutsu Kaisen and Demon Slayer have in common? Well, Demon Slayer had a movie come out. A very, very successful movie that broke every record imaginable in Japan. And Jujutsu Kaisen also has a movie scheduled for theatric release. Now, both of those movies are canon, okay? They are based off of material from the actual story, from the manga. On August 6th, 2022, we will be getting One Piece Film Red. You see where I'm going with this? May I interest you in some Shanks canon content to up the sales? Now, Oda shouldn't feel pressured to do anything because, you know, he's already well off. He's set for life, essentially. But this is more about, like, the team surrounding One Piece, the employees that bring this series to life, you know, and also for the brand. So yeah, I would be really surprised if One Piece Film Red doesn't have at least some canon content in it. Maybe we get a flashback about how Shanks gathered up and met his crew. Maybe we get a sequence about how the red-haired pirates were able to obtain the Gomu Gomu no Mi in the first place. So maybe we'll get to see who's who in the movie as well. Whatever it is, I do think there's going to be some canon material in the film or related to the film because the timing, it just matches the story perfectly, right? So that was the first thing that was suspicious about the timing. It's like, whoa, so Oda said like that Shanks was going to make his move in the manga, and that tends to coincide with the release of this movie about Shanks. And then we also learned this week that he's also willing to reveal stuff about Shanks in the SBS. Again, Demon Slayer, Jujutsu Kaisen, top sellers, they're doing this. Putting canon stuff in the theaters gets butts in the seats. I remember during the Strong World premiere in Japan, they actually gave out Volume 0 to the people that went to the premiere, right? So they had like this exclusive volume of One Piece. And that, to me, that volume is canon because it has like the prologue of the series. We have like different shots of people in the One Piece world before the start of Luffy's story. So to me, I consider Volume 0 canon. So they might end up doing the same thing with Film Red and give you a volume. Like if you go to the premiere in Japan, they might give you a volume about Shanks' backstory, or about stuff that we don't know about Shanks yet. Now, we'll have to wait for Oda's Jump Festa statement this year to see what he can reveal of the upcoming events. But just based off of like what we know already, okay, just look at this. 2022, the beginning of the year, we start off with a brand new anime opening. That's number one. The anime itself is going to be giving us the rooftop fight next year as well. We got the Shanks movie coming out with a very high possibility of it containing canon material. And then the manga itself. In the manga, we're going to have the ending of the Wano fights at the beginning of 2022. Wano is going to end, right? And so at the end of each arc, we get a dump of world-building lore. We're going to find out what happened to Vivi, Sabo, the Shichibukai. There's just been so much foreshadowing to a bunch of different pieces coming together and falling into place in 2022. That's going to do it for me today, guys. Thank you so much for watching and for all of your support. Let's see what Oda has to say in Jump Festa this month, what his official statement reveals about the future of the series. And until then, until the next chapter, I'll catch you guys later. Bye.